18. And from the second paragraph, isn't it? So it's your turn.
From the above definitions of some of the major key concepts in Islam, which we all concept of knowledge, it becomes clear that their meanings are closely interrelated. In particular, things which all focus upon the known proper place, which points to a certain order in the system and one's relation to the order's external existence and mental existence. The hierarchy, I mean, when applied to the human order, is not to be misunderstood as a kind of hierarchy created by men and articulated into a social structure, such as a system of caste or graded priestly organization, or any kind of social stratification according to. It is not something organized into a social structure organized in the ethical behavior. The organization in the mind is not formulated by the human criteria of power, wealth, and lineage, but by the Quranic criteria of knowledge, intelligence, and virtue. When the mind recognizes the reality that knowledge and being are ordered according to their various levels and degrees, and when the attitude and the behavior acknowledges by action what the mind recognizes, then this conformity of the acknowledgement with the recognition by which the self assumes its proper place in coincidence with the act of acknowledgement is none other than adab. But when the mind displaces the level and degrees of knowledge and being, disrupting the order in legitimate hierarchy, then this is due to the corruption of knowledge. Such corruption is reflected in the confusion of justice, so that the notion of proper places no longer applies in the mind or externally, and the disintegration of adab takes place. The disintegration of adab, which is the effect of the corruption of knowledge, creates the situation whereby false leaders in all spheres of life emerge. For it not only implies the corruption of knowledge, but it also means the loss of capacity and ability to recognize and acknowledge true leaders. Because of the intellectual anarchy that characterizes this situation, the common people become determinists of intellectual decisions and are raised to the level of authority on matters of knowledge. Authentic definitions become undone, and in their state, we are left with platitudes and vague slogans disguised as profound concepts. The inability to define, to identify and isolate problem, and hence to provide for right solutions. The creation of pseudo-problems, the reduction of problems to mere political, socio-economic, and legal factors becomes evident. It is not surprising if such a situation provides a fertile breeding ground for the emergence of deviationists and extremists of many kinds who make ignorance their capital.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin. Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. For those of us who, for those who are following online, then the pages that we are discussing will be from page 17 until, or rather from page 18 until the first two lines of page 20. Yes, and page 18, which we are discussing today, is an elaboration and an extension of the discussion of adab, of places of things, yes, within a system. So now today, the major key concepts of Islam, according to Professor Atas, converges upon the concept of knowledge. And why does he say that the major key concepts converge upon the concept of knowledge? Because that is how man partakes. That's how man partakes of the system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, including the very universe. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the universe and all its constituent parts with relative grades of perfection, with relative grades of excellence, and things are to be graded like that. And as we know, this system that pervades nature belong in a supportive ecosystem that supports, like I say, life. It supports beauty. It supports sustenance and several other things within a system. So knowledge, therefore, is how man partakes of this, and it is through knowledge that man organizes himself to be in accordance with the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. to fulfill his role as vicegerent, to carry the amanah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to him. So now, as it is said that the notion of proper place, yes, points to order in the system of one's relation to that order. The order is in the form of hierarchy, which pervades the created order of being and existence, both external existence and mental existence. What is the opposite of hierarchy? The opposite of hierarchy is the obliteration of differences. And that is in society, in the external existence, we call it the principle of egalitarianism, yes, the principle of equality. So equality means the obliteration of differences. On the other hand, Islam supports the notion of hierarchy. But here, Professor Attas, when it comes to the human order, is very clear that although we are proponents of hierarchy, the hierarchy that is meant here is not the false hierarchies that have existed throughout history and in various societies of man's making, which includes one, a hierarchy that is created and articulated into a social structure. Articulated and created into a social structure. As we know that different societies throughout history and in different ages, whether they be in the age of mythology or in the age of religions or now in the age of the secular society, they have different, society never have really achieved what is called egalitarian society. There has never been. This is just an ideal. It is an ideal defended by ideologues. They may try to achieve equality, but it has never been achieved in society. So, since therefore that hierarchy is unavoidable in society, we ask what then are the valid system of hierarchy. So first and foremost, one of the more famous, well-known structures of a hierarchical system is a system based on caste. This term caste, I think, originates in the Latin or in the French, chaste, that is to be pure. In other words, that society is somehow stratified, divided in such a way that the different castes do not intermingle with each other. Yes, do not intermingle with each other. Usually, when we study human societies, it is reminiscent of the Indian society of the Hindu Valley that has divided themselves into castes based on heredity, based on hierarchy, and segregation. There is no intermarriage between the castes. The responsibility of each caste is identified, and social mobility is limited to that which is within one's caste, like that. Then another system of stratification or hierarchy is the graded priestly organization. The graded priestly organization, we would say, is reminiscent of the system of the Catholic Church. Yes, the system of the Catholic Church, with the orders from the secular as well as the ecclesiastical class of priests. And of the ecclesiastical class of priests, they have a system of election from the highest offices held by the Pope, yes, which is an extension of the function of Peter, who was said to be the trustee of the message of Jesus, and downwards. And they have a specific system of how obedience is to be enforced. And furthermore, it comes with several doctrines, including what was affirmed as the infallibility of the Pope. And that's the graded priestly organization. And the graded priestly organization also developed in history so as to support the system of power within the organized religion. And then, of course, the third is any kind of social stratification according to class. This is more well known amongst the sociologists, because sociology itself in Western academia can be said to have been born in the 19th century, or further elaborated in the 20th century, whereby social stratification is one of the central concepts of modern sociology. And of course, when it comes to modern stratification, well into the modern times, we now see society being divided into, upper class, middle class, and then low class society. And then they have terms such as the SES, yes, the socio-economic status. And then you have lower SES, middle SES, and the upper SES. These are what you call the status quo. So therefore, Karl Marx had his own idea of stratification, and Marx, let us say, pivots stratification upon the notion of relationship to the means of production. Relationship to the means of production. So he made it an economic hierarchy as a means of economic function. Doesn't mean that he agrees with the hierarchy, but that's how society seems to be arranged. And it is interesting that the economic reading of society is merged with his historical notion of dialectical materialism, as if the engine of history is run by movements and changes in technology that leads to economic changes. So you had, for example, the age of mercantilism, yes, where society is composed of merchants and traders, until eventually you have, and you have also, say, agrarian societies. So agrarian societies are societies that relied upon agriculture as a mean mode of their economic living, and the political system that is productive of the agrarian society, according to Marx, is the feudalistic system, where you have the nobility, you have the lords and the serfs, and of course you have the king as the sovereign, but the lords and the nobility are basically landowners, and then you have the serfs. They basically labor, and they pay rent upon whatever that they produce, and not only that, they are to act with servile attitude towards the landed nobility. Then eventually, we see in the development of technology the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, and this produced something which is called the division of labor and other interrelated concepts, and with it an economic system of capitalism, clarified, elaborated by the likes of Adam Smith, and several mechanisms are said to have been central, like the belief in the invisible hand that somehow guides demand and supply, and for example, the political system of liberalism and democracy that supports the industrial economy, because liberalism and democracy stands to protect and enforce contracts, yes, to the benefit of the new emergent upper class of society, which are the industrial lords. The industrial lords are basically the robber barons. The robber barons are the monopolists. Yes, so the monopolists, and then you see this story being developed into America, and some of I suppose one of the more dramatic depictions of the evils of say capitalism in the late 19th and early 20th century America is this I think There Will Be Blood. There's a movie by that name that shows the evils of corruptive materialism. Nevertheless, the point of speaking about social stratification is that it is an unavoidable concept. It is an unavoidable society, and society, despite their modern adherence to what they call the principle of egalitarianism. As we know, in the latter half of the 19th century, and actually developing from the early modern period and the Enlightenment period, and towards the latter half of the 19th century, they underwent what is called the French Revolution, that promoted the principles of liberty, fraternity, and equality. Yes, liberty, fraternity, and equality. And equality means the basically the removal of hierarchy in society. And certainly, when you declare the notion of hierarchy, in this case, the hierarchy of the monarchy, and the hierarchy of the graded priestly organization of the church. So their struggle against the monarchy basically is their struggle against the notion of heredity as the basis of hierarchy. And their struggle against the Catholic Church is their rejection of religion as the basis, religion and its priestly organization as the basis of hierarchy. But although they kid themselves into thinking that they're going to fight for the universal brotherhood of men, and to a certain extent they have persevered in their struggle for egalitarianism, some of them a humane type of egalitarianism, but the very basic action of hierarchy, and that is the problem of identity. Who is to be regarded the notion of basically still imposed, but now these days, excellence, ethics, let us say acceptable basis of hierarchy, but rather now they make another fee different in the Hellenic age. In the Hellenic age and onward of Western society is them and the other citizens, Oriental other, Occidental other. As the Greeks said that the non-citizens are barbarians, and it carried over. Yes. So while they were basically in the domestic front, you will find in the 19th century somebody like John Stuart Mill fighting for liberty, yes, fighting for the rights of women, fighting against religion and the hierarchical caste system based on the church. Abroad, it's a different story, yes, because they continue to oppress India. Yes, they continue to consider that those outside of their immediate circle of ethical concern, that they are of a lower class. And certainly, while the founding fathers of America carried with them the liberal discourses of John Locke and Thomas Paine, who wrote the manifesto on the rights of man, but yet they carried with them the sin of slavery. Yes, they carried with them the sin of slavery, and in order to justify that, some of them did justify it via biblical means. And eventually, when they did abolish slavery, the impact of the, let us say, notion of dominance over the other, over the subhuman, yes, continued in the form of racism. Yes, in the form of racism. And this is very interesting, that while they progressed in the mental realm, yes, whereas they consider every individual as possessing of souls and being worthy of respect for their intellect, they carry over the negative stereotypes with regards to the external features of man. Yes, the racism continued in the form of the perception of the external features of man. And certainly with regards to women, likewise, yes, it was a long struggle for women to enjoy the rights of equality in the West, and even while, let us say, in the period of the first wave, say feminism, women were, grudgingly tolerated in the public sphere. Sexism persisted. Yes. So basically, the notion of hierarchy and order except that either you would have a version which is acceptable or a version which is oppressive. And the version which is oppressive is that which is extremist in nature. Yes. Which categorizes society based on the notion of dominance. Whereas a hierarchical society based on orders of excellence, or say an aristocratic order, yes, need not necessarily be based on this notion of oppression. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the notion of Adam. Yes. So now that we have presented this, we have seen now how how the record of human history has not been, let us say, has not been properly just. I mean, we human beings have now oppressed each other in the name of power. They have oppressed each other based on wealth. They have oppressed each other based on gender. They have oppressed each other based on race. They have oppressed each other based on lineage, and they have tried to defend their superiority based on lineage. They have oppressed each other based on belonging to a tie of kinship. Yes, and secondly, to a tie of citizenship. Yes, foreigners are excluded from your circle of moral concern. So basically, this is where the likes of Friedrich Nietzsche would say that in truth, all human individuals and human societies, insofar as they bend themselves as societies, they are only ever truly concerned about the will to power. So if they are of the powerful, talented class, then they would like to support the ethics and the morality of the Superman. And if, on the other hand, they are of the mediocre type, they are of the, let us say, the disenfranchised, then therefore they would support the morality of the meek, meaning to say that supports egalitarianism, that supports equality. So you can see, therefore, this basic, this basic exploration on the notion of hierarchy and on the notion of egalitarianism in Western history has not been one of the aspects that anyone likes to talk about, but it is a reality. Yes, there is, I think, in the 1960s or perhaps 70s, a French anthropologist by the name of Louis Dumont. He wrote a book called Homo Hierarchicus. Yes, Homo Hierarchicus, in which he tried to argue, based on his studies of the hierarchical caste system in India, as well as other forms of hierarchies in society, that human beings are basically hierarchical in nature. However, what differentiates between one type of hierarchy and the other is the basis of the hierarchy. And Professor Atas here is discussing about how some bases of hierarchy are basically just means of oppression. Yes, and he says three, especially of human creation. Yes, of human creation, three especially are causes of injustice and oppression. That is one based on power, based on wealth, and lineage. Yes, we can just shortly think about this. Power, wealth, and lineage. If you use that as a criteria to determine the worth of a person, that's naturally how societies function, isn't it? You would see that those who are powerful will not be treated the same way as those who are not without power. Those who are wealthy will not be treated the same, even before the court of law that pretends to be just, even before the court of nation states that pretends to be treating all their citizenships with equality. Yes, power, wealth does play a role, and lineage to a certain extent. Likewise, if you come from powerful families, if you come from well-connected families, then it has. So naturally, human beings, yes, who are not guided by the right principles, this is how society tends to destabilize. And power, wealth, and lineage, these are particularly aspects of the external aspect of human beings, the hayawani aspect. Yes. On the other hand, Professor Attas is saying that rather the true basis of hierarchy in Islam, and Islam is the vision of reality and truth that is based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, who knows mankind, that rather it is by the Quranic criteria of knowledge, intelligence, and virtue that society ought to be organized. Yes, knowledge, intelligence, and virtue. Of course, here by knowledge is not meant merely scientific knowledge. We're already clear by now that the meaning of knowledge as al-ilm. Yes, al-ilm is that which breeds khashya. Yes, as the Quran mentions, innama yakhshallaha min ibadihil ulama. Indeed, the one who is truly fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ulama. Yes, so that means to say, the more you have knowledge, the more you will be fearful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more just you will be. And the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those who walk upon the face of the earth humbly. And furthermore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that the ones who knows, yes, or those who are knowledgeable will be akin to the angels in their verification of the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shahid Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bears witness. Yes, and the angels and those who have been given knowledge that there is no God other than Allah. And their verification, their acceptance, their witnessing that there is no God other than Allah means their acceptance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Malikul Quddus. Yes, the possessor, cherisher, creator, sustainer of this world, who is at the same time holy, who is at the same time sacrosanct and free from any blemishes, free from any corruption, like that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, therefore, since he presents the pinnacle of reality, he is the very reality. So therefore, if you base your societal hierarchy on knowledge, it will be a society that produces justice. The problem now is the problem of the corruption of knowledge. Yes, if you consider that knowledge is merely scientific sophistication, if you consider it as merely technological invention, then you have scientists who are unjust. You have scientists who are willing, for example, to sell their talents to the biggest bidders amongst those who follow the hierarchy of power, wealth, and lineage. There are scientists who are willing to give service, yes, to those who are bringing about destruction in this world. But on the other hand, the ilm here as an organizing principle in society, and intelligence here, again, by intelligence, we must mean something else compared to the modern secularized understanding of intelligence. Intelligence, at least we can say for certain, that intelligence is not whatever the IQ test measures. That's a very poor way of defining intelligence. Yes, because in the same way as, let us say that what is heat? Heat is that which is detected by a thermometer. Well, you design thermometers in order to detect heat, but heat is not that which is, that's a very lazy definition that doesn't detect what, isn't it? And similarly, with regards to intelligence, the intelligence tests are basically designed by men and women, I suppose, also amongst the psychologists who design several tasks which are cognitive in nature that will test your capacity, of which they have identified symptoms or rather are signs of a very well-functioning cognitive structure, amongst which they test for memory, they test for pattern recognition, they test for even, let us say, linguistic capacity, they test for vocabulary, and so on. So different tests will have different weightage to different things. That's not the meaning of intelligence in Islam. Although Ibn Khaldun did speak about an aspect of intelligence that involves such things, but it involves such things and more. Because real intelligence in Islam, in the Ghazalian sense in the word, is ultimately attested by a person's ability to act according to his conception of reality. In other words, the basic test of one's intelligence is if he knows that the akhirah is of more value than this world, that it is more permanent and everlasting, that it contains greater pleasures, it is more enduring, that he should be living for his akhirah more than for the sake of this world. That's the true sign of intelligence, isn't it? In the same way as a person who knows, say between two cars, which one has the more efficient system, which one is more lasting. In other words, you are able to assess the proper valuation between two things, and then you actually, in fact, do follow that which is more valuable. Now, that's the sign of intelligence, isn't it? So intelligence contains that element in man. So the intelligent man must by nature also be kind. And the intelligent man must also be good. The intelligent man must also be humble. So again, the cornerstone concept, the cornerstone idea would be your conception of knowledge. Yes. We have, from the moral tales that we tell our children. Yes, the moral tales that we tell our children, we say the moral of the story, isn't it? Usually the moral of the story would involve the fact that forgiveness is better, the fact that, let us say, patience is better, the fact that, let us say, frugality is better. But somehow, while we tell these universal moral stories to our children as adults, we tell them to do the very opposite. Yes, because in order to succeed in a capitalistic world, we tell them to sacrifice their ideals. We tell them to compromise on their vision of ethics. We tell them that it is okay to involve oneself in a cutthroat competition. It is okay to use false advertising. It is okay to do this and to do that. And in order to reach the top, they may cut corners and they may betray allegiances and alliances and so on and so forth. But the truly intelligent man, yes, is the intelligence that can recognize the creator of intelligence. Yes, the truly intelligent person is the one that can recognize the creator of the intelligence and the values of which the intelligence is rewarded. Yes, you see in Immanuel Kant, his very brilliant and elaborate critique, or basically description, a description of the powers of cognition. He is unable to transcend the subject. Yes, basically he managed to arrive at a description of all the powers of cognition. Yes, intuition, combining concepts, imagination, and so on and so forth. But he's unable to recognize that this very beautiful system, as this very beautiful organic psychological system, has a creator. He cannot arrive at that. He said that such knowledge is impossible. But on the other hand, so the Quran leads us, yes, to the full appreciation of the potentialities of the intelligent system by recognizing that the intelligent system has a creator that endows the system with its ability. And having identified that, it also identifies in the sphere of value that the best thing that it should be aiming for is the rida, is the contentment of the source. Yes, the contentment of the source architect, the divine artificer. Yes. So who is the intelligent man? Yes. Do we say that the intelligent man is the one who is a monopsonist or a monopolist, to the extent that basically he is the one who has killed all his competition, who has used the law to his advantage, even to the exclusion of justice? We don't say that such a person is an intelligent person in the proper understanding. In the proper understanding, we do not say, yes, that a person who dupes and who lies about his kin and his kid and his family relations as a just person, the liar, the betrayer of trust, than the intelligent person. Yes. And thirdly, virtue. Yes, the natural correlate of intelligence and knowledge is virtue. So the one who possesses all these three in the greatest degree, yes, that's how society ought to be organized. Yes, in other words, that if you if we do away with the scientific discourse, then such a person would be the sheikh who is the inheritor of the prophetic qualities and traits.
The tree was
Knowledge, intelligence, and virtue.
and virtue.
Virtue, yes. As for virtue, it is defined as excellence of disposition. As virtue is excellence of disposition. In other words, it is habitual characteristic which leads towards good action. And virtue is of two types. There's the virtue of the intellect and there's the virtue of behavior. The virtue of the intellect is things like wisdom, sagacity, quick wit and memory, quickness in understanding. And these are all virtues of the intellect. And the higher virtue of the intellect is the capacity to grasp what ought to be done at a particular moment. Yes, right action. Yes, so now that's a virtue of the intellect. Then there's the virtue of character. The virtue of character would include something like temperance and iffa. Subhanallah, and the prophets, they possess the highest degree of virtue with regards to iffa and shaja'ah. One is temperance, the other is courage. Where courage is concerned, you will see that in the prophets, none of them are described as cowards. Yes? None of the prophets possess characteristics of cowardice. But nor are they, suffering from the excess of foolhardiness. They are not people who are like brigands like that. They are not like the robbers. Yes? That's a different type. That's defined by excess. But nor are they defined in terms of deficiency. And likewise, in terms of their temperance, you see, you look at the Prophet Musa alayhi salam. When you ought to see him as a person of virtue, yes, and as a virtuous person, you see him now, after having left Egypt, yes, reaching Madian, how he is a person who, when the daughters of the Prophet Shu'aib, yes, assisted for his help, he is then a gentleman who helps them. And after having helped them, yes, he is not a person who takes advantage over them. Until these two young ladies, yes, who then approached him modestly, invited him over to see their father. And then one of the daughters said to the father, Inna khaira man ista'jartal qawiyul amin. Indeed, the best person for you to entrust with the duty is the one who is able, strong, capable, and the one who is trustworthy. How is the daughter able to identify one who is trustworthy? How is this? Aside from the very fact that she's the daughter of a prophet, he's very careful over all his limbs. Yes. So this, the virtuous person is to the extent that even the Arab Bedouin, yes, who saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his eyes, he knows that this is not the eye of a liar. Yes, and there are certain virtuous traits in speech. Likewise, fasaha is one of them. Eloquence, yes, but eloquence used to the advantage of truth. Yes, the eloquent person who is virtuous is not a demagogue who basically uses his powers of rhetoric to bring about destruction and to use it to tell tales about people, to use it to spin false and corrupt news. So imagine, therefore, now how far our society has strayed from the ideal of the true hierarchy of knowledge, intelligence, and virtue. It is, supposing now we wish to restore the order based on knowledge and intelligence and virtue as basically the ground principles of society. Then amongst the challenges will be those who adhere, yes, to the hierarchy of power, wealth, and lineage. Yes, because power, wealth, and lineage, once it is concentrated in the hands of a few, yes, they will want to ensure, yes, as false leaders, they will want to ensure their continued rule, and they will use propaganda to their advantage. And since they are not men and women of virtues, they will basically exceed in their punishment. like in the case of Prophet Sulaiman, yes, with Queen Balqis. So Queen Balqis is portrayed in the Quran as a person of knowledge. One of the things consulted her shura, she decided that she ought to send gifts and presents, and she would know that by sending gifts and presents, yes, to this person, whether he's a prophet or a king, yes, and that's a very important distinction, yes. Although the Prophet Sulaiman is also a king, he is first and foremost a prophet. A prophet is given wisdom and virtue, and being given wisdom, knowledge, and virtue, there are certain things that would be unbecoming of a prophet to do. Like, for example, in accepting gifts, they will not retaliate with attacks. They will not conquer. Yes, and she was saying that to her people, that we shouldn't launch an attack against Sulaiman, yes, in order to portray our dominion of ourselves and our ability to conquer them, because she worried that in Al-Muluk, yes, if the kings were they to enter a village, what they will do is they would destroy the order within the village. They would make the nobles, yes, as inferior peoples. That's the characteristics of kings, yes. The characteristic kings, or who possess such virtue, who possess such characteristics, is that they are people who look after consolidating their power, and they don't see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the source of their power, and they want to ensure that, yes. And that's why, lying becomes a principle. That's why propaganda becomes a principle. That's why they work to acquire ever more elaborate systems of weapons in order to destroy their enemy. That's why they suffer a industrial military complex. Yes, these are all symptoms. Yes, symptoms of corruption of knowledge. So imagine now. So look at how scientific is the thinking of Professor Naqib Al-Attas. Yes, that he's basically solved the riddle, if human beings are able to follow through the argument, that in order for us to be able to save the world from the major catastrophe which is at hand, from climate change to the military industrial complex to racism to all these other types of injustices that continues to permeate our society, what needs to be done is to restore the proper conception of knowledge, in order that you can restore the proper notion of leadership. Yes. Once the proper class of leaders emerges, yes, then you can enforce Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command. Yes. Inna Allah ya'murukum an tu'addul amanati ila ahliha. Indeed, your Lord commands you to return trust to its proper keepers. And if you were to judge amongst mankind, then you should do so with justice. Imagine, even the capacity to fulfill one, yes, the capacity to fulfill this command has a requirement. Yes, first and foremost, you'd have to have proper knowledge, and you'd have to submit to the proper knowledge. If you have proper knowledge and you submit to the proper knowledge, only then and you understand the consequences like that. And this is tricky, you see, because proper knowledge would involve also purification of the soul, yes, and to identify that you are at fault for certain blemishes of character. You would be working on, how to remove schadenfreude from yourself, the enjoyment of the pain of others. You would work hard to remove envy and several other other requirements. Once you have done that, then you'll be able to restore that kind of order. And perhaps ultimately, when will we be actually able to see, yes, society restored, whereby the hierarchy is based on knowledge, intelligence, and virtue? Perhaps it is in the time of Mahdi. Perhaps it is in the time of Isa alayhi salam. Yes, but it was done in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. See how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, despite his message, yes, emerging in a tribal society in which it was a false hierarchy that controlled the society, yes, lineage, wealth, and power. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam managed to revolutionize the society epistemologically, in knowledge, and ethically. So based on his epistemic and ethical and spiritual revolution, by the end of his prophetic office, yes, or towards the end of it, you will see that in the city of Medina, yes, who controls, who basically becomes the Dayan of that city? It is him. Yes, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And who is the highest of rank in knowledge, intelligence, and virtue? Prophet. And from the Prophet down, who does he pick who does he identify? Yes, as the persons of virtue. Yes, who are basically, if you look at the succession of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that generation followed his command. Yes, from Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab, Sayyidina Uthman, Sayyidina Ali, as the Khulafa al-Rashidin. And how did they rule after him? Yes, they ruled based on the principles of knowledge, intelligence, and virtue. And everywhere throughout Islamic civilization, you have pockets of this happening. Yes. All right. So I think that's the major. So basically, in summary, we have spoken today about the necessity of hierarchy in human societies. However, we have now discussed two possible. So we say that hierarchy is the opposite of equality. We say that equality or egalitarianism, whereby we equate everyone, is a recipe for disaster. Then we say that there are true hierarchies and false hierarchies. The false hierarchies are the one that is based on power, wealth, and lineage. And as for the Islamic conception of hierarchy, that is reminiscent of adab, then it is the hierarchy based on knowledge, intelligence, and virtue. And we have dwelt to a certain length on the meanings of each of these individual terms. And we have given examples of how adab can be an organizing principle in society, and the resultant of adab is justice. Yes, justice is the spectacle of things being in their proper place.
Of the three things you
Yes.
mentioned, of the intelligent
Knowledge, intelligence, and virtue. Yeah.
is there anyone more suitable than the others in terms of leadership? Because I was thinking, as you mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ, obviously the perfect man and balanced it, but the successors after him, they have than the other maybe, and then the following maybe had more towards, because they had very different characteristics, personality, right?
Yes.
Do you think that one is more suitable to for leadership than the others?
Yes, of course. What we see is that in the immediate aftermath of the Prophet ﷺ, the society followed in the fact that leadership is combined both in the spiritual and the temporal sense within a single person. Meaning Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq did in fact basically continue the fact of political leadership of the Prophet ﷺ, while at the same time being spiritually virtuous. And the same case is said of Sayyidina Umar, Sayyidina Uthman, and Sayyidina Ali, and perhaps the 6 months of Sayyidina Hassan. Yes. And what we see then became of the Muslim society, insofar as they are able to keep intact the hierarchy, although now no longer in its perfect state, but at the very least, the society is still better ordered, is that they have now bifurcated between spiritual leadership and external leadership, but now external leadership taking advice from spiritual leadership. That's how Islamic civilizations have been able to prosper throughout the world. So you have the case of Ottoman Turkey, in which Muhammad al-Fatih was always under the command of his spiritual sheikh. You have Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. You have the great kings of the Rasulic kingdoms in Yemen who took advice from their spiritual leaders. So you have that. And then you have the notion of the accepted limits of the powers of the kings, yes, based on the notion of statehood or khilafah in Islam, which is amazing, because despite the fact that we knew of tyrannical rule in Islam, that we knew of unjust kings in Islam, the Islamic Khilafah as a whole still respected the fact that the king is only unjust as an individual, that he is not to meddle with the content of religion, that he is not the supreme authority in religion. Never was he the supreme authority in religion, because the authority in religion, in terms of knowledge, intelligence, and virtue, in terms of the interpretation of the religion, still rested in the hands of the ulama. Yes, it still rested in the hands of the ulama. Meaning to say that Al-Ma'mun may have been powerful, and perhaps through the mihnah that he introduced, certain of that time, they were oppressed. Some of them were imprisoned, flogged, and so on and so forth. But it was a temporary mihnah. The society has still understood that it was not Al-Ma'mun who was the authority in interpreting revelation. Yes. And similarly, so throughout the time, while temporal power may have been in the hands of, say, several tyrants, in terms of the interpretation of the Sharia, yes, it still was in the hands of the ulama who were most qualified in terms of knowledge, intelligence, and virtue. That's how society can maintain the semblance of balance. But Professor Atas have now identified the problem of the corruption of humans, pseudo ulama, false leaders, and these are even more dangerous than the corruption of the political leaders, because the corruption of the ulama meant that they would give false interpretation to the Sharia, and false interpretation is not a valid interpretation. Yes, so you have the problem with the traditionalists, the traditionalists basically who eschew the intellectual tradition of Islam and claim to have been able to extract directly from the Sunnah. You have the problem of the modernists who try to change the interpretation of the religion so as to fit the modernist discourse. And then you have the outright secular intellect, no valid authority to speak about religion, but yet choose to speak religion. Now, these are the true false leaders that needs to be counted before you can address the problem of, say, false leadership. Yes.
I have another question about the knowledge. Sorry, I missed the first. But the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Yes. So when we are using English words, we have to be very careful to portray Islamic concepts, because Islamic concepts, they derive from the Quran, and the semantic content must be as faithful as possible to its content in the Quran, and we must not be burdened by the baggages of the words in English or in any other European or Eastern language. So when we say knowledge, we mean it as a translation of the term ilm. Wisdom, we mean it as a translation of hikmah. These are, as we say, al-ilm of the soul, the property of the intellect, having arrived at meaning, and meaning having arrived at the soul. And meaning refers to the condition of things within a system. Yes. So basically, when you identify the system, to whom is due what, as wisdom is precisely if knowledge is meanings of things, and it is the property of the prophets. Yes. When the prophet said they have been given in Tafsir al-Bawi, it is mentioned that Al-Ilm, do you remember? Al-Ilm and the Luqman, Amal Bihi, and then it forgot the fourth component. So hikmah, yes. So the one, and he doesn't exceed hakim. Yes, he becomes proportionate justice. So akal, which is whose potentiality is fulfilled by knowledge, and the knowledge that's amal, correctness in actions. So it is like an eye, isn't it? Once you're used to identify the target, then actions will follow that it hits the required spot. When you discipline your child, you don't exceed, nor do you fall short. When you act, when you give speech, when you give counsel, when you give advice, now that's the characteristic of a wise person. So it's a virtue, therefore. Yes, the wise man is a person who, because he possesses the disposition of wisdom, you will see that this man he thinks before he decides, and his decisions are always acceptable because it is always made under the consideration of the people who are rightly considered, and so on and so forth.
So for the individual, it is upon him to strive to gain that knowledge.
Yes, and then wisdom with practice of that knowledge.
How does he maintain himself from the outside, especially during these times where there's so many influential things from the outside factors, especially in terms of the hierarchy in society as he progresses, this person, how does he maintain that those qualities?
Well, there are several factors that strengthen it. Well, first is the extent of his knowledge will determine his ability, isn't it? And then secondly, of course, if he possesses the right guidance from teachers who have been trained by teachers who have been trained by teachers who have been trained until eventually reaching the Prophet. So one is right knowledge, and two is right guidance in the sense of isnad, which is sahih. And then, of course, the others will depend on other things, such as his intelligence, his persistence, and his other virtues. Fadal. Fadal. Idu? Reflections? Belum lagi.
The thing I find interesting is you mentioned about the elements of have a spiritual sheikh, and they had it's also present today to a certain extent. Some might say it's political, some say it's religious, but it's there. And when they died, they would also bury themselves literally one of them at his feet. But you see the same concept in other Muslim states, and Muslims had the same concept in India, and you also see, and I thought about Alexander the Great and his teaching. I mean, so many civilizations have this, and it goes back to what Plato said, that either the philosophers have to be kings or philosophers. And you see in practice that doesn't work. A state cannot be run by Al-Imla.
Yes.
And when the leaders try to become Al-Imla, that doesn't go well either. But my question, that was I thought that was interesting. My question would be that, the Prophet did praise, and he praised the Persians. And some of the ulama say that interpretation of the hadith was around Imam Abu Hanifa, but he praised the Persians. And how would you, in this terminology, how would you translate that? Because it's apparently not intelligence, I assume, because they didn't believe in the oneness of it was Russians. So how would you describe, I don't know how to put it, like a people or somebody who is very well at what he does, very intellectual, but we wouldn't use the word intelligence. So how would we describe non-Muslims who are very good at philosophy or architecture?
Yeah, so Imam Al-Ghazali, again, subhanAllah, he's really thought through everything. So you see in the Ihya, in the Book of Knowledge, the final section is on the intelligence. And of course, intelligence is a single word with multiple meanings. And these multiple meanings all interrelate with each other. And of course, we have selected the most worthy of meanings of the intellect would mean that intellect which is able to act for the benefit of the possessor of the intellect. Certainly, isn't it? Do you consider, say, between two people, yes, both equally intelligent, but the one who is, let us say both are good at maths and both are good at engineering, and both are good at, let's say, the theoretical aspect of business, who would you say is the more intelligent one between the two? It is the one who actually is able to make money out of that which is they perceive. So that means their intelligence has served them well, yes, isn't it? So Al-Ghazali then gave broadest and significant aspect of how an intelligent can profit a person. And this is based on the wisdom. Words are jewels. al-kayyis. The most intelligent one would be the one who's alive after this world, because it is permanent and it's more enduring, and so that's the primary meaning of intelligence. But you can say primary meaning can branch, of course, in the limited degree. It includes strength of memory and ease in understanding. That's a sign of intelligence. Intelligence would also include, in the case, I believe, our scholars have written about the peoples of the world in their genre, like called the Tabaqat al-Umam, basically a dictionary of peoples and societies. So they've written about the Greeks, they've written about the Persians, they've written about the Hebrews, they've written about the Chinese. What are the specific virtues? The data this came from the prophetic one, the Hikmah Dalatul Mu'min, and the other is in order to make sense of his statement, because he was making statements about well-known civilizations. And what do we know about the Persians and their and the achievement? Their is more in theological sense as a religion. In the theological sense, it is a corrupted religion. But in the practical sense, it supports militaristic, pragmatic, expansionist governance. Yes, that also understood the value of justice, and that's why the Prophet ﷺ from time to time have faced, justice like Anushirvan, and the genre which is called the Mirror Princess. Yes, works in with a particular kind of writing in Islamic political thought will be complete with examples from the Persian kings, and include the Tibrul Masbuk of al-Muluk, yes, or fi Nasihat al-Muluk. In this work, you will see a lot of them derived from Persian political wisdom. And Persian political wisdom, the fact that they a world empire and endured for so long. Now that's something that is worthy of understanding. And their ability to stamp corruption and so on. If you read the examples in the Nasihat al-Muluk, the Council for Kings, you would understand why now the Persians are selected. And we will see, certainly, the Islamic Empire was to endure partially to an extent, incorporated so much of the ethics and the wisdom. Yes, that cannot be. And of course, where is concerned, the Persians and their territory stand in between the different civilizations. We tend to over-highlight the significance of the Greeks because the inheritors of Greek civilization tells us to do that. Yes, because the West now, they claim to be the direct offspring of the Greeks. But we know that in truth, this is a highly selective development of knowledge, because in Alexandria and in other centers of knowledge in the period of Islam, when this translation movement was done, and they translated equally the writings of the Greeks, the Persians, and the Indians, and in some of these institutions of learning, all of these different traditions of learning will learn together. Yes. No, is that all right? Okay. You ready?
I'm not ready.
Okay. Inshallah. So if that's the case, then let us, inshallah, end our session. And until we meet again, wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.